Elias Thorne had once been known across the small mountain town of Silver Ridge as the man with the warmest smile and the loudest laugh. But after the tragic loss of his wife and unborn child in a car accident 3 years earlier, the light inside him dimmed until it disappeared completely. His home, once filled with music, flowers, and soft colors, had turned into a shrine of silence and shadow. The shutters stayed closed, the lights dim, and the man himself cold and withdrawn, avoiding people and refusing any form of comfort. To the townspeople, he was simply the widower who never smiled anymore. He spent his days repairing fences on his ranch and nights sitting in the dark, staring at the empty space where his wife once painted. When he finally decided to hire help to clean the house, something he hadn't done properly in years, it was out of necessity rather than desire. Dust had settled on every surface, cobwebs hugged quiet corners, and unopened boxes still held memories he was afraid to face. The agency sent him a new housekeeper, a young woman named Lila, who had recently moved to Silver Ridge in search of a fresh start. He didn't care who she was. He expected another person who would tiptoe around him, perform their work quietly, and leave him to his shadows. But the moment Lila stepped inside his house, something shifted. The first thing she noticed was how dark it was. Not just ordinary dimness, but a chosen darkness, as if someone had intentionally shut the world out. When she gently asked if she could open the curtains, Elias only grumbled a vague, "Do as you like." She pulled them open, and sunlight burst into the room like it had been waiting years for the opportunity. Dust swirled in golden shards, revealing parts of the house he hadn't truly looked at since the tragedy. Elias stiffened, almost offended by the brightness invading his gloom. Lila didn't comment on the darkness, neither the one in the room nor the one inside him. She simply began her work. She hummed softly as she dusted shelves, wiped counters, and rearranged forgotten items. Her humming was gentle, almost instinctive, and unlike anything he had heard in years. Elias tried to ignore it, tried to retreat into the familiar numbness of his office, but the sound followed him. It was as if her voice touched corners of his heart he thought were permanently shuttered. Lila was not the kind of woman who asked intrusive questions. She didn't pry about the pictures of a smiling pregnant woman she found tucked behind a dusty bookshelf. She didn't ask why Elias always looked tired, why he rarely ate, or why he never smiled. Instead, she treated the house as if it weren't a sad, forgotten place, but one that still had beauty hiding beneath the dust. She placed fresh flowers in vases, arranged books by the windows, and even fixed a broken lamp in the living room. Slowly, the house began to look alive again. Elias pretended not to notice, but he did. One day he walked into the living room and froze when he saw the old piano, his wife's piano, wiped clean and polished. Lila stood beside it, hands clasped nervously. "I didn't mean to overstep," she said softly. "I just thought it deserved to shine." Elias felt his chest tighten, but he said nothing. He simply walked out. Lila lowered her gaze, but deep inside she somehow sensed that something had shifted, maybe not healed, but shifted. A week later, he caught her quietly playing a single note on the piano. Not a full melody, just a soft testing sound. When she realized he was watching, she quickly pulled her hand back. But Elias surprised them both when he said, "You can play if you want." Lila blinked, unsure if she heard him correctly. She sat slowly and played a gentle, bittersweet tune, one she had learned as a child. Elias stood in the doorway, his throat tight. It was the first time music had filled his home since his wife's death. And though it hurt, it also stirred a memory of joy he had forgotten. Over the next month, Lila continued her work with quiet care. She brought fresh flowers once a week, always simple, gentle ones like daisies or baby's breath. She opened windows to let fresh air in. She sometimes brought homemade muffins and left them on the counter with a shy note. She didn't try to fix him, she simply existed with kindness that asked for nothing in return. And little by little, the house changed, and so did Elias. One morning, Lila arrived to find him sitting on the porch drinking coffee, a sight she'd never seen. Sunlight touched his face, revealing tired eyes but also a softness that hadn't been there before. "Morning," he said. Lila's eyes widened. It was the first time he had greeted her first. After that day, he found himself waiting for the sound of her footsteps, her gentle humming, her soft laugh when she discovered something amusing while cleaning. He didn't admit it, but her presence had become the one bright moment in his otherwise gray life. One afternoon, when thunder rolled over the mountains and rain clattered against the roof, Lila arrived soaking wet and shivering. She apologized for the mess she might leave, but Elias, startled by the idea of her catching cold, handed her a towel and insisted she stay until the storm passed. She hesitated, then sat by the fire he lit for the first time in years. They talked. Really talked. Lila told him she had grown up in a broken home and moved from place to place until she couldn't bear the noise and chaos anymore. Silver Ridge was supposed to be her quiet start. Elias, without knowing why, found himself speaking openly too. He told her about his wife, about the accident, about how the silence of the house had felt like both punishment and comfort. Lila listened, without pity, without judgment. Only understanding. That night something new took root between them, not romance, not yet, but a fragile trust. She wasn't afraid of his sadness, and he wasn't afraid to let her see it. As weeks turned into months, the house no longer felt dark. Lila decorated the porch with tiny lanterns. She planted flowers beside the walkway. She played the piano every Friday afternoon. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Elias began to smile again, tiny smiles at first, then real ones. But Lila didn't know the full truth. She didn't know how deeply she had changed him. She didn't know that the first flower she placed in his house made him cry in private because it reminded him of the life he had lost. She didn't know that her humming broke through walls he thought were permanent. She didn't know that her presence was the first warmth he had felt in years. Then one evening, when she was leaving, she turned to him shyly. "I hope I'm not doing too much," she said softly. "Sometimes I worry I'm trying to brighten a place that doesn't want light." Elias stared at her, really looked at her, and finally understood what had been happening. "You brought light here," he said, his voice low and full of meaning. "Without even knowing you did." Her breath caught, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. From that night on, things changed, not rushed or dramatic, but gentle. They shared coffee on the porch. They talked by the fire during storms. He helped her plant a small garden. She encouraged him to repaint the living room. He taught her small ranch tasks. She filled his home with warmth he no longer believed he deserved. When winter came, they found themselves sitting closer by the fire, sharing stories and laughter. And when spring returned, bringing new flowers and soft breezes, Elias realized he was no longer living in a dark house. Because light didn't come from the windows or lamps. It came from the woman who had walked into his life with gentle hands and a quiet heart, and unknowingly filled every shadow with hope again. And one evening, under the pink glow of sunset, Elias turned to Lila and finally said the words that had been waiting inside him ever since she first opened his curtains. "You didn't just bring light to my house, Lila, you brought it back to me." Her eyes glistened as she smiled softly, and for the first time in years, Elias felt whole again.